Meet this guy. This is Apatosaurus louisae, a vegetarian dinosaur that, when angry, could break the sound barrier with its tail. What's that? Not interested? Not cool? Well, how about this? This is a planocraniate, a species of crocodile and reptile whose claws evolved into horse-like hooves for swift running. And now, look at this. This is Charybdis, once notorious for creating whirlpools in the sea to sink Greek ships. And in today's video, friends, we're going to talk about some traits of extinct animals that are totally out of this world. Take a look at this organism, for instance. It's called Hallucigenia, a worm the size of a thumb that scientists spent 50 years studying just to figure out which end was its head and which was its tail. In 1977, British paleontologist Simon Conway Morris saw the first Hallucigenia fossil in Canada's Burgess Shale and spent the next 15 years studying it upside down. Can you grasp the depth of this? A professional paleontologist whose job is to identify fossils was in this predicament. As a result, subsequent studies forced researchers to use electron microscopes, through which they found that one end of the fossil had some terrifying features. There's a reason why this creature needed to create such illusion. A time when the first hard-shelled marine arthropods began stepping onto land. This forced many land-dwelling creatures to develop new survival tricks. What could a creature do with a throat full of teeth but unable to chew, and 7 pairs of legs but unable to run? It would choose illusion to survive. But was that enough? Around the same time, there was another arthropod with a complete sensory system that could coordinate about 110 pairs of legs simultaneously. This fascinating creature was called Anomalocaris voltae. Don't mistake it for being harmless just by looking at it. These guys were the largest marine arthropods of their time, about 24.5 centimeters long, and expert swimmers. In fact, back then, the seas were ruled by these multi-legged arthropods because of their paddle-like legs. What was that? A shrimp, a squid, or some unknown arthropod? Well, questions like these puzzled researchers for nearly 90 years regarding a particular creature called Anomalocaris. When British paleontologist Joseph Whiteaves first saw an Anomalocaris fossil in 1892, he thought it was a shrimp. But by 1911, when its mouth was studied, another researcher, Charles Walcott, claimed it was a jellyfish named Patoya nathorstii. People were starting to accept this proposition until 1978, when another claim emerged from the same British paleontologist Conway Morris, who had studied Hallucigenia upside down for 15 years. In reality, this specimen contained fossils of 2 creatures superimposed on each other. The body belonged to a sponge called Liginia cambria, and the head was that of a jellyfish, Patoya nathorstii. But then, in 1985, Harry Whittington and his student Derek Briggs identified it as an abnormal shrimp, hence the name Anomalocaris. With its inward-facing sharp teeth, squid-like dangerous tentacles, 6-foot-long body, and shrimp-like strong armor, it could chew through anything alive. Literally, the only arthropod that could rival it was an 8-foot-long jointed aquatic scorpion, Eurypterid, whose claws alone were about 1.5 feet long. Want to know how strong this creature was? Well, modern-day Japanese coconut crabs, despite being just 1.3 feet long, have claws with about 3,000 newtons of force, enough to crack a hard coconut in one snap. Even with a conservative estimate, that 8-foot scorpion would have had enough strength to sever your arm from your torso in a single snap. But this is about 467 to 458 million years ago. What happened to these apex predators afterward? I think we all know. 2 major mass extinctions. The first was the end Ordovician, and the second was the end Devonian, where overall climate change and declining dissolved oxygen levels killed most marine life. The result? A new era of creatures emerged, looking something like this. Any guesses which modern creatures might be their descendants? Reptiles? These are actually synapsids, our human ancestors. I know it's hard to digest looking at them, but check out this phylogenetic tree based on DNA matches. You can clearly see that synapsids and reptiles diverged long ago. However, mammals, as a group, evolved from one of these early non-mammalian synapsids. In simple terms, while reptiles might have been second or third cousins to synapsids 35 million years ago, we mammals are their direct descendants, their own blood. Since reptiles diverged from synapsids much earlier, they had a head start, while mammals were still taking baby steps. As a result, reptiles evolved drastically, some developing abilities to break the sound barrier with their speed. Can you hear that? That's the sound of Apatosaurus louisae's tail, which, 150 million years ago, it whipped at about 360 meters per second, faster than the speed of sound. What does that mean? If that 14-meter-long massive tail struck any animal, its spine would snap in two. However, there's a catch. Some scientists believe Apatosaurus likely used its supersonic tail only for defense. Unlike smaller tails, if such a massive structure reached supersonic speeds, the stress would break its bones in just 2 or 3 strikes. This is probably why later, heavy herbivorous dinosaurs thought copying Apatosaurus makes no sense. Its weapon is powerful, but not practical. We need a modern weapon instead, or at least a hammer. The result? Meet the Ankylosaurus, the living army tank of the late Cretaceous period, patrolling the Pacific Northwest 68 million years ago. For defense, it had stone-like body armor, and for offense, a full-fledged hammer. Believe it or not, their terror was so great that some predators abandoned the ground to hunt in the skies, even though, unlike modern birds, their bones weren't hollow to aid flight. Yes, I'm talking about flying dinosaurs, pterosaurs, or, more specifically, Hatzegopteryx thambima, the largest of all pterosaurs, at least as big as a giraffe. When fully spread, their wingspan was about the size of a full-size Volvo bus, and their head alone reached 5.5 feet in length. If I stood beside it, its skull would stretch from the ground to my shoulder. But does that mean their long skull housed a large brain? Of course not. Surprisingly, in the late Cretaceous extinction, winged dinosaurs were less successful at surviving than those resembling crocodiles with horse-inspired toes. Yes, you heard that weird combination, right? About 55 million years ago, there was a group of reptiles called Planocraniates, whose toes resembled horse hooves, allowing digitigrade movement, running on the tips of their toes. They thrived with unique characteristics until Bigfoot entered the scene. Yes, Bigfoot is not a myth. Last century, researchers found giant jawbones and teeth in China and North India. While the Chinese believed these were mythical dragon teeth, Indians thought they might be ancient orangutan fossil remains. It was later discovered that these were fossils of a new ape-like species called Gigantopithecus, which roamed Earth between 12 and 8 million years ago. They stood about 3.5 meters tall and weighed around half a ton. A gorilla is strong enough to overpower a human, so imagine 3.5-meter tall, 500-kilo gorillas. Interestingly, recent research suggests Gigantopithecus was likely not a giant carnivorous ape, but a giant vegetarian panda, more interested in eating bamboo. Let's move on to our final creature, which you've all been eagerly waiting for: Charybdis, a sea monster that kept Greek sailors awake at night for years. It was discovered that tidal currents colliding in the Strait of Messina, southern Italy, naturally create strong whirlpools capable of drowning small ships. In other words, there was never such a sea monster. It was just an ancient Greek legend, a folklore that temporarily made it seem real. But friends, the creatures we've talked about showed just how diverse life on Earth was.